One of the things for the last 2 years, you've been coming to the ICD. It's always a pleasure to see you here. It's always great. First time in the annual conference 2012, when you were actually still the president of UNESCO. Now also a couple of more times last year. Every time you come here, I think you inspire many of our young people, our students, in everything that you've done. And some of the things that people talk about after is like how all the past till being the president of UNESCO. So I think as interested as your work in UNESCO is everything that you did in the past. And somehow I wanted to go over some steps, some important moments of your life, and maybe that would be interesting for them to know how one gets to be the president of UNESCO. Because when I read your biography, I feel like the title could be something like Manual to Become the President of UNESCO. It's really yeah, you've done really many things in the field of culture, communication, and education that somehow has led you there. So the first thing I'm interested is that you started your career being a journalist mainly. You were reporting mainly on arts and culture. And at this point of your life, and also working for Hungarian TV, so more in Hungary. So what were your expectations at that moment? What was your let's say, when you started your career, did you see yourself as a diplomat later? Did you see yourself involved in politics, or were you more inspired by just journalism, media, and by, let's say, talking on cultural and arts issues?
Thank you very much. If I may go back to my childhood, because I think it is important for all of us. I mean, for me, I'm not afraid to say, it was very influential. I was brought up in a very little village in Hungary, in Transdanubia, and my father was the local doctor of the village. And you know, in those times, the local doctors did everything. So they were the psychiatrists, the psychologists, and they knew everything about the person, and the person really trusted the doctor. And I was given a very strong example by my father and by my mother, who was working with my father, about work ethic and about how you live and behave with other people. Because this village was a very diverse village. First of all, my parents did not belong to this village because my father came from the so-called wrong class. He was a class enemy, you know, in these communist times. The people who were not workers or the peasants, but intellectuals or old noble families or whatever, they were the class enemies. And so they had to leave their homes. They had to leave everything behind. And so they had to find a new place to settle down. So my father settled down in this little village. And he told me that you can see in this village there are many different people. We had German people living there, Croatian people living there, Slovakian people living there, all different minorities living in this village, Romas, gypsy people living there, and so on. And my father very often took me to the houses of the poorest people, because he wanted to show me that we are all different, but after all, we are all the same human beings. And he is responsible, and this is why he became a doctor, to help to everybody. And I think for me, it was a very important education. I have to confess, I didn't know what UNESCO was, so I didn't have a kind of dream or idea becoming the president of UNESCO, because I didn't even know what UNESCO was. Because we had a sort of very limited freedom that time. But the other very important influence for me was that I started to play the piano and to learn music from a very early age. My father was a violinist and I was a pianist, and so we did a lot of music together and also in my family. And somehow music gave me a key to many, many people. And even today, wherever I go in the world, music touches not only me, but through music, we can touch each other. So that was another very important key for me for the future life of mine. And the third one was that because they were the communist years, there was no freedom of expression or information. But because we were close to the western border, so meaning close to Austria, we were able to see the Austrian television not in an open way, but in a hidden way, but we saw the Austrian television. So meaning I was able to understand from the world much more because I saw the news. It was another influence in our life, and actually we didn't even see the Hungarian television. So by the time I got to the Hungarian TV news, I didn't know anyone, although they were very, very famous, but we really used to see the Austrian TV. And what I learned was that I knew what my parents told me and what my family story was and what I thought about the life, but I also had to know what I was told in the school, through the media and so on. So I had to be able, in a very early age, to understand that how to protect your thoughts and how to protect yourself so that you wouldn't give in. And I sort of made a sport out of it. And that is why we, that time, used poetry, music, art. What did we do? We didn't speak about culture diplomacy, but actually we used all these vehicles to send very strong political messages to each other. So my parents were very angry when they found out that I wanted to be a journalist, as I came from the wrong political class. So obviously it would be a nightmare for me, but I was very interested. And as a young person, I didn't want to understand the fear of my parents, but I knew that I would be not able to become someone who is a trustful communist journalist or politician, because it was just not possible. So again, I had to learn how to act in this strange situation and still be able to talk about what I felt was important to be told. And again, what did I find? I found the language of culture and art. And through this language in journalism, I was able to talk about everything what was very important for me, because I was not able to talk about political issues, because at that time it would have been that very dangerous. And first I was a music and theater critic, and then I actually joined the Hungarian television, and it was already in '83, and that was already a time when it was not so strict. Obviously, in our history in Hungary, after the 1956 revolution, when we stood up against the Soviet Empire, and of course we were crushed immediately by the Soviet tanks, but we still started a fight against terror, against dictatorship. And towards the 80s, the very cruel way of this dictatorship faded already out. But what we didn't have, that was freedom. What we didn't have, that was the free thought. And you see, you probably don't understand, but for me, even today, if I hear the Hungarian anthem, which is my anthem, I immediately, as being a musician, immediately I hear the Soviet anthem, because I was brought up by that, and I'm very angry about that. Although we live in a different way, we live even in a different time, but that reminds me that we lost a big part of our life. And of course, for me, then when I moved to Budapest, to the capital, for me, the hope was when I was able to go to the USA Embassy, to the library, to take part in events, to go to the Austrian Embassy. Of course, we knew that we were monitored, but at least we went there and we listened and we learned and so on. So that was, again, culture diplomacy. So for me, actually, my journey was very straightforward. Even I used different vehicles. I did different things like music, or I did some acting as well, because theater was also a very important tool to talk about important topics, and journalism. But actually, I was always doing the same thing. I was trying really to build the bridges between people, different cultures, different languages, people with different colors, people with different religions. The village I lived in had different churches, and me being a musician, I went to play the organ in all the churches. So I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed that kind of freedom that I was able to learn in all the churches. So that was for me a big start. And I think everyone has got a personal start. And of course, it's only the start, because then you learn every day, you experience every day, you try to understand the world every day, you try to understand what is hidden, what you can't see, what you don't understand every day. So it is then up to you, and this is up to your surrounding. And of course, the political changes, because if we hadn't have the freedom, what came quite late in my life, in 1990, when the Soviet troops left Hungary and we had the first democratic election, who knows what I had done? I don't know. But it gave me a new chance, and I was able to open up my horizon, and I was able to become a woman or a person of a global world, which I very much appreciate, because I know what does it mean if you are not free.
Okay, now I think that later on, after your experience in the Hungarian television, you are offered a grant from BBC to study media and democracy, which is also very interesting for me, because at that time, how this opportunity came? What kind of relation did you have previously with maybe BBC, or was it like some sort of also the way you were introduced also to politics, or how was this opportunity? How did it came?
It was a very political step that time, because, as I said, in 1990 we had the first free democratic election, and that time the British government was very interested in these so-called Eastern European countries. We were later called the New European countries as well. We had all kinds of names. Anyway, these Soviet bloc countries, like Hungary and Czechoslovakia at that time, and Romania and Bulgaria, and I know that there are students from these countries as well. So they wanted to pick, to choose some young professionals who have been already influential, meaning who have already done something important in their life, and they wanted to take them to England and to give them the chance to learn and to have the chance to open up their eyes. What does it mean democracy? What does it mean pluralism? And all that. So that time, our son was already 3 years old. That's why I'm saying today you can come here, you go tomorrow to Paris, after that you make your master in London. You know, it's fantastic. You live in a free world. But for us it was not possible unless we emigrated, which I never wanted, because I was the only child of my parents and I couldn't emigrate and leave them behind. So we had already a son with my husband, and my husband came home, and I was very famous because, you see, we had only one television. So because I was talking about culture and art and interviewing all the world stars, you know, Pavarotti and Banderas and Gabay and everyone, I was always the so-called end of the news. And that was the only television news, so everyone remembered me. I was writing serious things previously, you know, about theater or whatever. No one knew about me that time, but from these 1 minute, 1 minute 30, 2 minutes, 30 seconds, whatever. So I was very famous. I was all over the, I don't know, covers and so on. And my husband came home and he brought a newspaper, and there was an advertisement by the British government about the British government scholarship. That was the Know-How Fund, and that was a scholarship for the BBC. So my husband told me, okay, now you come down from the covers and you go and study again, because we start a new life. We were given this chance by God and by life, which we never thought about that. So we have to understand how the world really operates. And so I went and I applied for this grant, you know, sort of from the street. And they picked me because I was famous enough to influence already people, but I was young enough to be able to learn and to change my way of thinking. That's what I think, that's why they chose me. Because that was a policy at that time of the British government. And that's because, of course, I was working for Hungarian television. I was very much interested in public service system. And even today, I think that the highest quality public service system is the BBC. And I know it is not as good as it used to be. So I know all this, what we say all the time, but it is still a very important way of talking, being unbiased, reporting. So that was the highest university one could have, being a broadcaster. And so I went there, and that is true that my whole horizon opened up. And then I went home to Hungary, and I went to the president that time, the chairman of the Hungarian TV, and I told him, look, I know it now, but we would need to set up a school, because otherwise the journalists' the way of thinking of the journalists will not change. Because before that, there was one party-ruled media, right? Then suddenly we had a lot of parties, and I was very afraid from all the parties wanting again to rule and use the media. And we needed time to build up what does it mean, what is the role of communication and media in democracy. And at that time, the British government was so interested in these newcomers, new countries, that they would have been ready to support it. But Hungary was not ready for that. And then I left the country in 1993 because I thought that this is not the direction I was hoping to see. I was very afraid of seeing all the new parties wanting to influence the media, and the media didn't grow up and didn't have the understanding for really fulfilling the real role. Don't forget that was in 1990, 1993. And then my son was 6-year-old, so I was a mother, and my main job was being with my son, and then with another government scholarship, I got the Chevening scholarship, which was the highest, and I went back to university. I was already much older than you, so I went back to university. So I took my son to school, I went to university, and I always wanted to learn diplomacy and international communication, but because politically I was not trustful, I couldn't study diplomacy when I was young. So that was always my dream. So instead of studying diplomacy in Hungary when I was young, I was given this chance again from life that I studied diplomacy in London and also international communication. And then I started to work. I went back a little bit to Hungary. I had a lot of programs, a lot of TV shows, a lot of dialogue shows, I would say. So my ideas were always the same. How we could come closer to each other, how we could really understand each other, how we could really have a true dialogue, how we could act and interact with each other. And this, of course, I used in my television programs as well. So I had a lot of chat shows, and I hosted a lot of big events and so on. And then finally, I left Hungarian television in 1995, and then you know what is Eurovision Song Contest? Okay, you see, again, Eurovision Song Contest was previously, when I was young, not something what we were watching, right? Very much. And I was already living in London when I got a phone call from the Hungarian TV, and they told me that they would like me to go and host the Hungarian bit. You know, when you say, "Good evening, Budapest is calling, and here are the points of Hungary." And that was me. 2 minutes. And I remember that it was in 1995. And I remember I told the cameraman and the director that now 2 minutes will mean much more in my life than all my 10 years in Hungarian TV, because everyone will see it. So I will do a good 2 minutes. So, you know, lighting, makeup, background, whatever, and choreography for 2 minutes. You know, you can do a lot in 2 minutes. So I was quite good in these 2 minutes. I enjoyed it. I went back to London. And on Monday, already, in the corner shop, they recognized me. Ooh, I said, okay, so that's Eurovision Song Contest. But what was more important is that I was then a freelance journalist and corresponding to Hungarian television channels and writing to Hungarian papers, but I based myself in London. And I went to Heathrow. They were promoting that time the blue Coca-Cola. No, Pepsi-Cola. So I wanted to write a piece about that. And while I was traveling on the train, there was a lady sitting on the other side opposite to me, and she said, "Oh, I know you." I said, "I don't think so." She said, yes, of course, you were in European Song Contest on Saturday. Yes, I said I was. She said, "Oh, that was really good. Would you like to come to a screen test?" Because actually she was the editor of the European Business News Television. So that's how I got into European Business News Television. That's why I'm telling everyone that 2 minutes, half a second, you know, you don't know what will change your life. You don't know. So there is no such thing that a small thing. There is no such thing that a small meeting, nothing. You just take everything seriously. You just prepare yourself 100% for everything, because you don't know. You don't know when you meet the person you are looking for. So, you know, these 2 minutes changed my life in that sense, because, of course, it was very difficult to get a job for a Hungarian television broadcaster because of my pronunciation, you know. I mean, that's not Oxbridge. And, of course, I knew that I had to find something where the diversity of the pronunciation is not a burden. And that was European Business News Television, which was mainly done by, of course, Western Europeans. So I was the only one who came from Eastern Europe. And then I started to work for the BBC and the CNBC and all that. So I was a freelance, and I was a journalist. I was a filmmaker. I did a lot of big documentary films, mainly about artists, because what I have been always interested in, it is the process of creation. And that is why I think culture diplomacy is so important, because it is about the process. It's the process of inspiration. It's the process of creation. And then in 1999, I became the funding director of the Hungarian Culture Institute, which was a difficult decision, because before that I was very free. And of course, when you join the government, the ministry, then it's another story. But it was such a big challenge, and I was so interested, and I knew it so well what I had to do, that I just wanted to do. And I did a big film about Sir Georg Solti, who was a great conductor, who was Hungarian, left Hungary in fascism, and became Sir Georg Solti, very famous all over the world, Chicago and London. And he told me that after the war, as he was not allowed to do anything, he escaped to Switzerland, but he was not allowed for 8 years to play, to conduct, just to give twice a week piano lectures, that's all. So when he was given the chance, and actually he went to Germany, and that was the time when they set up the new opera houses, he said it was like, you know, the hot water, which has the lid on, and in some moment someone takes the lid off, and here it goes, and no one can stop it. So I had the same feeling when I set up this center, because I wanted to use it as an example how we can put all the different cultures and peoples and continents together. And that is why I really moved to London, because you live in the middle of the world, but you still are close to Europe, at least to European architecture, which I like very much. So that was it, and then it was the time in London.
When, I'm very interested about you speak a little bit about one of the first things that you did working for the Ministry of Culture, which was the founding of the Center for the Hungarian Center for Culture in London, which was more meant to be as a cultural hub, let's say, than just a cultural between London and Hungarian relations. But and that was a very important step for cultural diplomacy, and I guess also later to become a diplomat for the UNESCO, an ambassador for the UNESCO. And finally, my last question, I want to give it to the public, is like how this 2 minutes presenter of Eurovision contest feels when she's nominated like as president of the UNESCO. How does one feel at that specific moment, or how did this opportunity came, and how did you how did you feel on that specific moment, or on the challenges that you had, or on the let's say projects that you wanted to develop there?
Because I didn't want to set up a sort of classical way of culture center, as I told you, because I wanted to have an experiment. I really wanted to create a space, and I found a very good location in Covent Garden, because symbolically, if you are in Covent Garden in London, you are in the middle of the world, because Covent Garden is the middle of the world in terms of culture and art and music. And I wanted I wanted people to come to the Hungarian Culture Institute because it is fashionable, because it is fun, because it gives them a chance to meet very interesting people, because it gives them a chance to be inspired, and because it is on the highest artistic level. So I created different programs and series, but always on the highest artistic level, and always in a way that it could become part of their lifestyle. And I don't know whether you know London, there is Maiden Lane. This is a famous little street in Covent Garden, and there is the oldest restaurant. It's called Rules. And I remember the first time and the first years I went there, I had to say to the driver, you know, a Hungarian Culture Center is just opposite of the Rules. But I told them, after a few years, you know, they will say, when they will be asked to go to rules, that they will say, okay, just opposite of the Hungarian Culture Center. But it was something unthinkable. Just think, Hungarian cultures, you know, Hungary is so small in this huge ocean. So the only way why we really became very successful was to create a space where everyone was welcome and where everyone was able to find something which made her or him interested, or that they could get something which they could bring with them. And so that is why, of course, I created the famous jazz club, and the Monday music soirees was, of course, always classical music and readings and poetry and everything, what you normally do in a cultural institute. But it was just the vehicle, because the main idea was culture diplomacy, really to talk about your culture, but so that you use a culture to connect the other cultures. And of course, for me, then I was asked to go to Hungary. By then I was living there for 13 years, and I was then state secretary for international affairs, for culture and education. So meaning I was responsible for cultural diplomacy in my country, and I was overlooking UNESCO as well. So it was my ambition. I wanted to go to UNESCO because I used to work for UNESCO as a journalist previously. I did a great series about scientists, and the idea was what is the responsibility of the scientists in the 21st century? And it is a big question even today, as we know. So it was my ambition, and after 3 years of being the state secretary, then I was posted. And again, the lead effect, I was so interested and I was so enthusiastic, and I knew already so much I wanted to do. So I just didn't stop, and I was just working and working and working. And I used the same method again. I was ambassador of Hungary, and I am. But whatever I did, it was about bridging. It was about building relationships. It was about looking for consensus. It was about finding common goals. It was about finding the common ground, and so on. So it was always above just one interest. And this is because this is what I believe in. And after 1 year, the ambassadors, I mean the influential, you know, there are influential and not so influential ambassador. The very influential ambassador, like USA, like Russia, like Egypt, like Morocco. I mean, really influential big countries, ambassadors, but from all over the world came and told me that, you know, we think we could not think about anyone better than you to be the president, the next president. And, well, when you hear this, you are not in a shock, because you don't know exactly what does it mean, you know. I mean, you don't know, you wouldn't know exactly what then you had to do later on. I was not aware of the fact that being the president means that you will become a real political power for international diplomacy. You will be invited by prime ministers, presidents, kings, foreign ministers all over the world, because they are all interested in you. They are all interested what you are saying, because in a way you are the one who represents the idea. That's what I'm saying, that you represent the idea of UNESCO, of this institution. And I remember when it really became serious, then it's diplomacy, so your government has to propose you, and then it is a long process. It's a big campaign. It took me about 9 months, and by August 2011, because I was sort of considered in the end of 2010, but by August I got the full support from all the electoral groups and from all the countries. So it was quite remarkable no one ran against me, although there were ideas, there were countries who originally wanted to run, and I'm not saying names and I'm not saying which countries, but it was very nice to hear when a very prominent representative of another country came to me and he said, you know, madam, we really wanted to propose our candidate, but no way that, you know, he could challenge you. So I felt the trust. This is what I felt. You ask me what you feel. I felt the trust, because just think, you know already you have all the support. Then it goes to the so-called executive board. 58 countries will vote about you. And they voted unanimously. Everyone voted for me. Not on any other candidate. Everyone withdrew for me. And then you are proposed by the executive board as president for the General Conference. And it was very probable that I would become, but until the very last moment you can't know, because in legally anyone can propose anyone at any moment. So actually, theoretically, you were not sure, but I was sure. And of course, it was a very difficult time. That was the time when Palestine wanted to join UNESCO, and that was the very first time when Palestine was proposed by the executive board for the General Conference, because since 1989, Palestine wanted to join UNESCO, but they were never proposed by the executive board, meaning we knew that it would come to the General Conference. So I was leading all these very, very hard political discussions already from the summer, plus we knew that we would lose a lot of money, because the United States cannot pay to any organization which would take Palestine as a full member, because they have 2 laws from the beginning of the 90s. And we also knew that the Obama administration is very committed to UNESCO, but to change the law, you know, the legislation in America, I think it's very, very complicated, and it takes a long time, and it's up to the Congress to decide. So it was a very, very sensitive situation. So I was not thinking about what I thought about myself, because I was in the middle, I think, of the most difficult political situation as the former president already. And I was trying to find a solution, and we couldn't finally find a sort of consensus, sadly. But what the president does then is to keep the moral of the House. So I never allowed anyone, any groups of people, whoever, to show negative attitude towards the other. I stopped them, because I really believe that UNESCO is the only place where everyone has got one vote. You see, there is no big country or small country or developed. Everyone has got the same right to vote, and if they vote, you have to understand what is the result. But the relationship between the people should be always on the level, that's what I think, which really takes us together working in this organization. And I remember, so already knowing that it will be a very hard General Conference, and yes, we became world famous because all the world media was standing there, and so it was a very, very harsh in every way. But what I felt was, and this is what I will never ever forget in my life, and I know it, I will cherish it, that just think about, you stand there, 1,300 people sitting there, because this is the time when all the countries coming with big delegations, and of course we have a lot of NGOs and observers and the whole world press. And what I felt is a total trust from the whole world you can't get more in life. So what do? You work even more because you just feel the responsibility. You really want to, I wouldn't say please everyone, but you want to be a fair player for everyone. So you just you understand what is your responsibility. And I remember the Indian ambassador told me, oh, it's very easy, Katalin. You just will be the heart and the soul of the organization. Now that's easy, isn't it? I mean, meaning, because it means for everybody something different, the soul and the heart. And so I used the formula of art, music, sort of the vehicles of culture diplomacy very much and very openly in the most difficult political situations, in the most difficult political debates and arguments. And that's why I was called the conductor of the house, because I told in my opening speech that let's think that we are an orchestra. And I'm coming from the music world, and I told you about this great Hungarian conductor, Sir Georg Solti. He set up with Boutros Ghali the World Orchestra for Peace in 1995. Why? Because he knew what fascism means. He knew what communism means. So he was the child of the 20th century. And he wanted, as he told me, he wanted to show an example to politicians that in an orchestra, the way the musicians work together with each other is the real democracy. So this is what I told to 1,300 people, and I said, so I would like to ask you to think about yourself as a musician. And that is true if you have an octet or a quartet or whatever. They come from all over the world, and they don't even know each other. But when they sit, they have to look at each other. They have to listen. They have to concentrate, not on themselves, on the other one. And that is really, for me, that was really, for me, the message that this is how we have to work. And this is what I've been trying to do.
Okay, so now let's open to you guys. Maybe you have some questions about UNESCO, about how to become the president, about how to have 2 minutes on television, on Eurovision contest. Every question is welcome.
Hi, thank you for being here.
Hi.
I'm Giulia, I'm from Italy.
Italy, hi.
Yes. My questions are 2, actually. The first one is about how does UNESCO operate in extremely serious situation like a war, as you said before, because during a war or a fight, nobody care about the heritage. So in this kind of situation, when it's not possible to wait the end of the war, how do you operate? I mean,
Very good question.
Who you talk with? And the second question is, when something become a UNESCO human site, heritage
World
site.
heritage site.
Yes, it means that all the responsibilities of that site are yours. It means that the country cannot operate anymore on that site.
No.
Oh, okay.
No. I answer.
So if, for example, the site is falling down, if like the Colosseum is falling down and nobody can pay the the restoration. So you arrive and the Colosseum became a heritage site. So in this situation, all the responsibilities are yours, or you have to share it with the government?
Thank you very much. What is your name?
Giulia.
Giulia. Okay, I start with the second question. The World Heritage Convention means that UNESCO works with the governments. First of all, it is up to the government and the National UNESCO Commission, so the country, to propose a site on the World Heritage List. Okay, so it doesn't come from UNESCO, it comes from the country. Now, there are two types of World Heritage sites. There are World Heritage sites which are in danger. So they can be endangered. Normally, for example, let's say in Syria, last year when we had the World Heritage Committee meeting, I talked to you about in Cambodia, the countries, the members of the committee decided that all the heritage sites would be put on the danger list because of the war. So normally the recommendation comes from the government. It is a very long process. It's a very complicated dossier they have to prepare. Then the UNESCO experts go to the country and they visit the site, they start working with the government, with the professionals of the country, and they advise them, you know, how to really propose a site. That is number one, because it's very, very difficult, and everyone would like to propose a site, and of course it is also a big political war, you know, which site will be put. Because what is it? This is also a great respect to a country to have World Heritage site. Actually, the most World Heritage sites we have in Italy, of course, as really the birth of civilization, and the highest numbers of World Heritage sites are actually in Italy. Now, if then the experts of UNESCO will recommend the site, then it goes to the World Heritage Committee, 32 countries. It's always an election every 4 years. And then they decide whether they take it or not. Then it can turn very often to a political decision. You see which country is lobbying better and so on. But first, the professional decision is made always by the UNESCO experts. Now, let's say something has been put on the World Heritage List. The responsibility of keeping the World Heritage site and managing it well belongs to the government, not to UNESCO. It's the government. So the government, which proposes the site, also proposes a management plan. That is why it is very difficult anything to be put on the list, because this is a responsibility then of the government to protect this site. So that is why it is World Heritage, because it is a value which is a value for the whole humanity, as we call it. It's a humanity value. But actually it is the responsibility of the government to look after it. And if the government doesn't look after it well, then UNESCO can take the title away. Now that is the nightmare of the governments, you know, because it is very humiliating. And it happened not once, not twice, that UNESCO decided that the government didn't protect this very important site. Let's say, allowed to build a huge building in front of it, you know, or because there are very strict regulations how to keep the site, the look, and everything, or didn't look after it because didn't give enough money and so on. So it can happen that the committee decides about taking the title away. And this is very painful for all the government. And I remember when it happened to Germany, probably 4 years ago, even the chancellor was trying, you know, to do her best, but because they built something what they were not supposed to be built, they built a building which was not supposed to be built next to the World Heritage Site. The site lost its value, so it had to be taken away. So it is always a political decision, and of course, governments don't like to this happen to them because it is very humiliating. Having said that, it happens because there are situations when really they don't look after it, and then it just demolishes itself. It just demolishes. Now, this is very important to understand, that because it is an intergovernmental organization, the UNESCO is a laboratory of ideas where everyone is thinking together, and all these ideas are channeled into UNESCO, but also the ideas are channeled outside to the member states. But this is also a help and a support to the people living in the countries, because the governments take the responsibility. And this is not only, let's say, with the built heritage, but I talked to you about the intangible cultural heritage, meaning, different dances, movements, gatherings, meetings, so sort of living intangible cultural heritage. And the people who are proposing this are always NGOs or local communities, and they are proposing it to the government, and the government is proposing them to UNESCO, but it means that these kind of intangible items then are under protection. And that is why it is for humanity, because if the governments take the responsibility, they can't say, oh, I don't have money for this year, because they signed it. And it is, as I said, we don't have police, we can't go to courts and so on. But it is something else, when a government or a country signed it and it goes from one government to another government, it is about the country. If a country can't protect the heritage, it is a big blame. Now, of course, there are governments which can't do anything if there is a war, or if they don't have money, or anything can happen. And then we send the UNESCO experts there. We have got special funds. We work with a lot of private donors, so there are special funds, emergency funds, and so on, for special occasions. And then the UNESCO takes the lead and helps, gets the money, but mainly the experts are sent always by UNESCO. There are results and there are no results in the time of war. For example, in Timbuktu, UNESCO managed really to save manuscripts and very important cultural heritage. And it was in a collaboration with the French government, with the French army, with the government there. So it is always, UNESCO has to find whom to work with. First of all, you have to work with the government, because the government is your partner. I'm just telling you something. Syria, which we know, for example, are not recognized anymore, for example, by France, right? So the Syrian ambassador in France has been expelled, right? But actually, she didn't leave, because she is also the ambassador for UNESCO. And within the UN, Syria is still sitting. So when we work with Syria, and when we are totally worried about the amazing cultural heritage sites, then we work still with the Syrian government and with their army. Or we find international organizations or armies or what we are trying to work together with, or Interpol or whatever, secret police, secret service. So we have a lot of unseen networks. But of course, when they are killing everyone and they are demolishing World Heritage sites even, there, you know, sometimes you can't go there because then you will be killed as well. So that's why I'm saying it's very difficult. Sometimes it is a success story, and sometimes, sadly, we just wait, and then we try to work on different level, which is more the peacekeeping level, or which is more the peace building level, and which is also a kind of way which helps us to work with the women and the children, and working with other humanitarian organizations. So we live in partnership as well. Thank you.
Hello, Your Excellency. Thank you. My name is Ben. I'm from the USA. My question is about the Millennium Development Goals, and it seemed that UNESCO is leading an effort to get a cultural goal into the MDGs. My impression, just from like research on Google, is that there was some conferences in China where UNESCO is really pushing for this, and I'm wondering what the current status is. I know it's a very attractive thing when you first hear about it, but it's a problematic notion, and maybe some thoughts on how culture can fit into the development framework. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You were here last summer when I spoke about it or not?
No, not yet.
No, fantastic, because I remember last summer, just a year ago, I was here after China, because in China we had this big conference on culture and sustainable development. And this is true that UNESCO is trying to push this issue, because now we think that within the UN, education, of course, was the main concept in the Millennium Development Goals. And that is why Mr. Ban Ki-moon, in his second term, especially strengthened the need of education, and he started his own campaign called Education First. So Education First is working, and they managed to get a lot of extra funding and extra money. But if you ask me, sadly, we won't be able to give a positive result yet in 2015 about education as MDG and the Education for All program, which is led by UNESCO. Having said that, this is already on the map. Science is more touched through technology, not like pure science. Now, we had this idea and this hope that we would somehow get culture as a vehicle for sustainable development. And I don't want to speak about too much, but it is quite understandable that obviously through culture, first of all, you can create jobs. Culture industries are getting more and more important. In many countries, they measure how much percent in the GDP is bought by creative industries. So there is job creating and so on. There is an understandable argument for why we should put culture into the post-2015 development goals. In the UN, there is a working group, which is actually co-chaired by Hungary and Kenya. And so I know it very well that, however, many countries are very afraid of putting culture as such, as the vehicle of sustainable development into the post-2015 goals, developing goals. So now what we are trying to achieve is that the whole concept would be put into another group of of developing goals. I don't think so that we will manage to have culture and sustainable development or culture as such as a single development goal, but I still hope that member states will vote for putting this very important element into another one, you know, like democracy or freedom of expression, or, you know, so there are women and girls education. So there are quite straightforward development goals, what they are agreeing on, and probably it can be part of that. How we stand now is that there will be a report written. Until then, we have, I think, 2 more meetings in New York. And then to the General Assembly, it will be presented. And then there is 1 more year for the member states to come back to discuss it, because actually it will be the next year General Assembly deciding about the millennium, the post-2015 millennium goals. Thank you. Where are you from? From United States? Philadelphia. Okay, thank you. Sir?
Your Excellency, my name is Dimitris and I am from Greece. Is there any way from UNESCO to protect the sunk heritage?
The what?
The sunk heritage. For example, the artifacts that have been lost as a cargo from when they, as a ship cargo years ago, 100 years ago. Is there any convention related to Titanicos, for example?
I'm sorry, are you speaking about when they are stealing things, or what?
No, as a cargo in the bottom of the sea.
Ah, in the sea.
Yes.
Oh, yes. We have a convention for the underwater heritage. This is what you are saying, underwater heritage. Okay. Underwater heritage has got a same convention as the built heritage. So member states more and more sign the convention, and the same way we protect the built heritage, we also protect the underwater heritage. And actually Greece is a very active member of the Underwater Heritage Committee. And what is very interesting, that this is a very political issue. Just right now, for example, there is a biosphere reserve, which is actually in the sea or above the sea, but it depends, you know, on the border of the 2 countries. And underwater heritage is one of the most precious works, what we are doing, but is also one of the most politically sensitive works, because underwater is very, you know, normally we have the International Court of Justice, they will decide and so on, but there are a lot of countries who are arguing on that. That is why what we are trying to support and propose to the member states, that the best thing is to work in terms of underwater heritage protection, so that different countries are working together. So it's not only the responsibility of one, as we say, these are the transboundaries reserves or heritage sites, and we are telling the member states to propose more and more transboundaries heritage sites, because politically it is very difficult to say that, okay, now it belongs to me, but it used to belong to my neighbor, but actually it is a value which is important for both of us, or even for 4 of us. For example, in the biosphere reserve, we are now working with Croatia, Serbia, Slovenia, Austria, and Hungary on a transboundaries biosphere reserve, and this is also very difficult, especially because of the boundaries or between Croatia and Serbia, and even since the war, they haven't decided yet. So the only solution is that we make the borders outside the reserve, you see, and not between the countries. But this is very, very sensitive politically. But yes, underwater heritage is very important. Yes.
Hello.
Hi.
My name is Juan and I'm from Spain. I heard a couple of times during your speech you connected poetry and truth as the same thing or the same concept. However, from my own understanding, poetry is more about. You heard me well? Poetry is more, from my own understanding, poetry is more about taking the reality to the limits of the language and then end up in another reality where truth might be or might be not. So what do you mean with what you said?
First of all, congratulations to your new king. I heard that it will be a new Spain. I read it today in headlines of the World News that, so very handsome, very beautiful couple, that's for sure. Really, so really congratulations. And Spain is a fantastic country. And actually I go there every year, especially because of poetry. Because I think Spain is full of poetry. It has got this, what you can't really explain. There is such a, how do you say, duende feeling, which is above words. If I speak about poetry and the truth, I'm talking about the wish that a poet is writing poetry because he or she is looking for the truth and explaining in his or her way. Probably your truth is different and my truth is different. But very often, if I read a poem, something becomes very clear. Something becomes very easy to be understood. And something which I could never really phrase it. But if this is a good poem, if this is a good line or a good sentence, the mystery of the words and the poems can tell you the truth, sometimes stronger and in a more vivid and clear way than when we are trying to explain it. And this is what I think. And that is why I told you this very remarkable story that I was really talking about poetry. Of course, I knew where I was talking about poetry, and I knew that it was much more than poetry what I became part of it. But for the people who then had their own fears, poetry was a way of communication through which they were talking with each other. And when I was young and when I was living in a dictatorship, through poetry, we were able to talk on a level which was not which was not black and white. So meaning the political police couldn't say, you will be imprisoned because you wrote this, because we just knew what he wrote, but it was not something which could be taken to the court. So an art and poetry is above the way of communication which can be caught in every moment. And that is why I'm saying it is a very important vehicle. And I also said that actually in my speech when I was elected, I said, if we believe that diplomacy is very important, the classical way of diplomacy, which of course has got different levels, then I say that kind of classical diplomacy is the novel. But I think culture diplomacy is the poem. And I think poetry is very much needed. That's why I quote always William Carlos Williams, because he said, although you don't get the news, but you get something much more subtle, much more deeper, much more touching you. And that is why I believe. Of course, you have to be interested in poetry. You have to have the sensitivity to be interested or to understand. But I think Spanish poetry is very diverse, very much in depth, goes back to many centuries. So I I think poetry has influenced politics very often. Thank you. One more.
One more question here? Okay. Okay, we'll take the last question here in the front.
Okay. I'm Marisa, and I come from Germany. And first of all, I wanted to thank you that you take so much time for answering our questions, because it has been very explanatory and inspiring the way you answer them. And then I would like to know, as you were talking about the situation when you became president of the UNESCO, I would like to know how it was in your life, because you have been a journalist before, to practice cultural diplomacy while being influenced, as also working with so many different countries, by the politics. And how difficult was it for you to make such big decisions that a president of the UNESCO has to do, and how to interact with all the different countries, with all the different politicians, and not being influenced and stay objective, what I think the president has to say. Yeah.
Thank you very much. First of all, when I am a diplomat, I can't be a journalist. But I am. So, meaning it helps me to look at the things from outside. This is what I was trying to explain, that I learned very much in my life to look at the things from outside. So, meaning analyzing all the time, for example, what is going on, what is happening, what is my role in it, do I do it well, and of course that comes in a way from journalism, because in journalism you have to question everything. That if you are a good journalist, you don't just take anything from granted. You have to dig inside and you question things. So that is for me a big help, because even of course, I'm representing my government, and I'm working with other representatives of other governments, but I have this distance, in a way, looking into the situations probably deeper and trying to understand better. But that is true. This is two things: being a journalist or being an ambassador. When you are the president, you have to be neutral. You are a good president only if you are able to listen to everybody, you give time to everybody. And because every presidency is different, and it is very personal. It depends on the president, you see, because the only thing what we know is written in our basic law, but it is very little. It is just how you run the General Conference, that you are the one who have to protect, that the rules and regulations will be kept, that you have to protect the noble house, and you know. So but actually, then what you put inside, it's very much up to you. So I had my very straightforward three sort of directions, what I talked about when I was elected. One was the celebration and protection of diversity. What I said, cultural diversity, languages, religions, biosphere. So the diversity, so that, because we are actually, that is the normal, that we are all different. This is not normal that we are similar. This is normal that we are all different. So that makes the world a beautiful place. So don't take it as a burden, but as an source of inspiration. So that was my first thing. The second was the empowerment of the women, especially giving more chance to the women in conflict solution and conflict prevention, because sorry to say to the men, but I really think that we have got a great talent in that, because after all, we are giving birth to our children. We don't want them to be killed in the war. So, you know, genetically, I mean, mothers don't want really or mothers probably are more sensitive to work for peace or security. And also women, because we have got so many things to do always at the same time. We know that we want to go from here to there, but sometimes, you know, we just have to go that way. Now, men like to go that way. And of course, if they can't get through, then comes the war. Women, you know, are easier to find a way so that they finally get there where they are planning to go. So I also told Mr. Ban Ki-moon that this is very important to give the chance to women, to more women, to take part in peace talks and so on. So that was my second. And the third one was really using the so-called soft power, meaning culture diplomacy, science diplomacy, sport diplomacy in our international affairs. As I talked to you, that I really believe the multilateralism and cultural diplomacy is getting more and more important. But I was doing it with the member states. It was not sort of, how to say, a one-woman show. You know, I was just not saying it. I was always trying to find people who collaborated in that, or through these ideas I could connect other people and so on. And I had to be neutral because, as I said, we don't have a veto in UNESCO, not like in the Security Council and so on. So every country is the same. And that gives a big hope and power to many people, especially to small countries. And they really would like to show who they are and what they can give to the world. So in that way, it is much more democratic. And I always thought that if I have to be the soul and the heart of this organization, it means for me that the soul is really to find the common grounds and to find the solutions, what we can agree on. And really the heart of our work is to work so strong that we get into the true dialogue, and so that we could really find the solutions together. So this for a president, I think, is very important. But of course, not every president is the same, as I say. But you see, the other thing, I come from a small country, but a country which has got an amazing richness and diversity, and I think to protect this diversity is as important in my country as in the whole world, because the question is, you see, what we can give each other. That is very important. So why don't we change, you know, the glass of water, whether the water is too little or too small, you know? So why don't we change it and we say, okay, why don't we ask the other one, not that, what do you give to me? Why don't we ask, what do I give you? And then it is another kind of dialogue if it starts from us. So that was my technique as the president. And people are much more open for that, you know? Because if they think that you ask, okay, what do you give to me? What do you know, why? But if I say, I could give it to you, that, and then probably you can hope that the other person will be interested in you, and then it really starts the real dialogue. So, but it starts always inside you. You are the one. Don't wait for the other. It comes from you, always. Thank you very much, dear friends. Thank you for coming.